Mr. Finsky, and I'm using a different program to record here in Access. I'm from home now and not in my office, so hopefully this works well and we're still able to accomplish what we need to do. So Access Chapter 1, and I've opened up what we would have looked at in class, which is an example of a database, and I want to go through some terminology just to kind of get you started. First of all, the Access is just a PC-based database management system, and that term is DBMS. It's used for both personal and business market. It's not out in the business world that much, but the concepts that we will learn are universal within any database that you might encounter. And the overall writing file is called the database, and that's kind of our starting point. And it doesn't matter what kind of business you're in. If you think about organizations, they deal with a lot of data, a tremendous amount. Just think of FedEx, for instance. When you send a package, you've got the sender's first and last name, their street address, their city, their state, their zip code, who's getting the package, their first and last name, and all their information, as well as far as who is sending it, now who's receiving it, everything as far as the date that it was sent, the package weight, type of service. And they deal with millions and millions of packages a day. And if you think about it now, with a tracking number, you can even see where your products are located at any given time. That is not possible except through the use of some sort of database management system. Now, they don't use Access, of course, but the concepts apply to what they are doing. So when we create a database for a business and everything else, and in Access, we're going to have the ability to add information, delete information, edit information, and we're going to be creating the different types of information we want to maintain. So a database system is, this is called a relational database. And what that means is you'll see right over here on the left that we have 3 different tables that are set up, which holds different information in each one of them, but they are tied to one another in some capacity. And we'll look at that a little bit later. So that's kind of, the database is the overriding file, and then you break it up by tables. And in this example, we have 3 tables. A database like Crowder might have 50 different tables of information, and somehow it's tied into at least one other table within that database, making it a relational database. This is called the hierarchy of data. Within a table then, like for instance, if I go into classes and open this up, we have our records. And in this case, we have 7 records. Each class represents a record. And down at the bottom, you can see we've got 1 of 7 classes for this particular one. If I go into departments, I have 1 of 4. And in instructors, we have 1 of 5 records. Now, within a given table then, and you look at one individual record, a record is broken up into fields. Class ID is a field, class name is a field, department ID is a field, and so forth. So when you are creating a database, you have to decide what data you want to store. And you'll notice that this is broken up into many different fields within a particular record, and those fields are important to this type of information. This is classes, so they wanted to keep track of which department it was in, which section it was in, who the instructor was, and so forth. Now, here's an important point. You'll notice that, for instance, the instructor ID is 1 here, and you're like, well, okay, that's their ID number. How do they know that? Well, if you look over on the instructors table, we've got Roberto Pozos is instructor ID number 1. So they have tied these 2 tables, classes and instructors, with the instructor ID field. They're in both of those particular tables. If you look at departments, same sort of thing. There's their department ID. They have 4 different departments, 1, 2, 3, 4. And under classes, you'll see that under the department ID, they've identified which department they are attached to. So they're pulling some information from those other tables to tie these 2 tables together. Here's where that's important. Because it's a relational database, if you look under department, you can see here that this little plus sign has been created, and we'll learn how to do this. And it pulls the classes from the classes table that relate to department number 1. Same sort of example under instructors. Because I tied the tables together, I can look at Roberto here, and I can hit the plus sign to see what classes he teaches, and he has 2 sections right now. That is done through something called relationships, and that is we learn a little bit more about this in chapter 2, but you can see that these tables have been tied together by a related field in both of these, and we get a little bit more into this as well. A couple things you might notice that it's 1 to the infinity sign, which means 1 to many. You might also notice these little keys next to these fields. What that means is simply is on each individual table, there has to be what's called a primary key, which is a unique value in a particular field. In this case, it's class ID. Each class has a unique ID number. So if you think about in the real world, the government gives us a social security number, which is a unique field for everyone. So it's a primary key. The military does the same with their military ID. Crowder gives you a unique ID number, and so forth. So each table has that. Okay, last thing on this one, just to kind of show you some things related to Access interface. We do have our different ribbons: home, create, external, so forth. We'll be learning these as we go along. Here's where all of our objects are. We learned queries in chapter 3 and forms in chapter 3 and our reports in chapter 4. But this query is a question, so we're able to find information out about the data in the database. Forms allow us to create a different interface to input information or pull information out of the database. And reports is all about output and pulling information out that we need to print or send via email. Tables is where we'll do a lot of work in terms of creating them and inputting our individual data. Okay, so a couple things right here. You'll notice that I can sort these. I can show just my tables or my forms or whatever the case might be. I typically keep mine on all access objects. And right now they're sorted by object type, but sometimes you'll go to this tables and related views, which puts everything that's associated with the foundation tables that are in your database and what's associated with it, what queries, what forms, and so forth. I typically like to go to object type and all objects so I can see those. One of the things that we'll do early is create, and this is where you can create either tables, queries, or forms, or reports. We'll use a lot of these. And one of the things too that we'll do is external data, where we bring data from an outside source to create our table. Okay, so within a given table down at the bottom, you can jump around by using your arrows. You can go to the last or the first, and then the little asterisk always means you can add something as you go along. When you're in a table, you can use your arrow keys. I'm using my left, right, down, and up arrows to move around. And I can make any changes within any of these cells. I could change that to fall. I could change that section number to something. I could change the name. The only thing I wouldn't be able to change in this example is my class ID, because that's been set up as an auto number, which means if I create a new one, it would be 8 automatically. And we'll talk a little bit more when we create some of those. We do have scroll bars if we have a big one, a big database, and that would be on the right and at the bottom. That's something else to consider as well. Let's see if there's anything else that we need to show you. Oh, one thing that I do want to get you used to is when you want to look at the background of a particular table, this view button under home, we are in what's called data sheet view. If you go to this, shows us how the table is set up, including the field names that's in our table, what kind of data is being put into it. And then like under number in short text, we can put how long it is, what the caption is, and so forth. So we'll be using this a great deal. Okay, that covers the first pause and practice. And now we're going to get into a little bit later in the next one about how to set one of these up and start using a database. So be sure to read this first section. It's got some good information, and it'll help you understand the purpose of databases and the very basic parts of those.